Hi, this is Cindy Lauper, and you're watching South Africa Now.
Global Vision presents the television news magazine of Southern Africa. News. Views. Frontline focus. In-depth analysis. Covering the coverage. Cultural features. This week, South Africa Now reports these stories. More violence and killings erupt in the townships. Nelson Mandela calls for an all-party Congress.
The ANC is very much aware of the need for unity. If power is to be wrested from the hands of the minority regime, that unity amongst the opposition forces, amongst black South Africans, is essential.
In South Africa, 2 out of every 3 black students fail their final exams. As some South African schools begin to integrate, we'll tell you why the education crisis looms larger than ever.
But for them to learn, the conditions must be such that they are able to learn. There must be facilities, there must be teachers, they must have books.
Mzwakhe Mbuli is known in South Africa as the people's poet. He's an artist that is only now beginning to gain international attention. Recently, he toured England and will continue to bring his combination of political poetry and jazz energy to the world.
Admire me, I am the beats from the drums of change.
All of these stories and more this week on South Africa Now. But first, the uncensored news with Thandeka Gqubule and Fana Kekana.
Dumelang. Violence and bloodshed marked the weekend of January 12th and 13th in South Africa. At a soccer game in Orkney, a gold mining town 80 miles from Johannesburg, at least 40 people were killed and 50 injured in a fight during a soccer match that ensued over a referee's decision. Those killed were trampled as spectators tried to escape by battering down a security fence. An estimated 30,000 attended the game. And on Saturday, January 12th, another 35 people died and 40 were injured at a funeral vigil for an ANC youth organizer in the township of Sebokeng. Gunmen thought to be gang members stepped out from the shadows and fired automatic weapons into the crowd of mourners. Residents called it a direct attack on the ANC and said the gang had ties with Inkatha. In addition, the police were accused of complicity for their failure to protect the mourners despite previous requests. 10 suspects have been arrested.
The ANC has called for an all-party Congress to form a provisional government and quickly abolish apartheid. Such a group would decide the manner in which negotiations for a new constitution would be carried out. The call was made by ANC Deputy President Nelson Mandela following a meeting with President F.W. de Klerk, who has been in favor of a Congress for some time. Phillip Tomlinson has more on the story.
The All-Party Congress would include all of South Africa's political parties, and specifically all liberation movements, in yet another effort at black unity. The ANC's hope is to generate more political muscle to pressure the government into moving ahead with plans for a new South Africa. The demand for black unity was also made at the recent ANC Consultative Congress. We spoke with Johannesburg-based ANC spokesman Saki Macozoma on the phone.
Those organizations which are conceived as part of the liberation movement, and it is envisaged that they should get together around the issues on which they agree and work out common positions which they can represent. All the political parties of any significance in this country would be represented, which will work out the broader constitutional principles around which a South African constitution will be worked.
People increasingly realize that the goal of liberation is not immediately around the corner, and that therefore unity is more important than positioning oneself for an immediate transfer of power. The state wants to appear to be open to and encouraging to unity, but at the same time understands that its relative strength is gained by dividing its opponents. And I think we'll see the state playing both both sides of the coin in that sense.
This new development has brought varying reactions. The government's chief negotiator, Constitutional Minister Gerrit Viljoen, reportedly said, "I welcome the ANC's point of view in favor of a multi-party conference." The Conservative Party, in a statement that seemed to suggest a fear of black unity, called the proposal a step to subjugate the whites to a black dictator. The Pan Africanist Congress has expressed interest in a united front. And Chief Gatsha Buthelezi of the Inkatha Freedom Party has once again declined to take part, saying this of the ANC: it wants the South African government to step down so that it can take over. The call for an all-party Congress is therefore just one step along the road to the winner-takes-all power the ANC South African Communist Party alliance is aiming for. So, while the rest of the world faces the prospect of war, the ANC is resting its hope for peace on an all-party Congress, whose success is by no means assured. For South Africa Now, this is Phillip Tomlinson.
What should be the shape of the South African economy in the future? One of the ironies of the debate over nationalization is that major sectors of the economy are already nationalized, controlled by the Afrikaner-dominated white government. Reformers in that government have proposed transferring many of those assets into private hands, but for the moment the privatization has slowed down because of pressure from unions and liberation groups. One free market economist is now proposing another approach, actually giving away shares in state enterprises to every individual in the country. Tom Hazlitt, now at Columbia University in New York, outlined his proposal in the New Republic called One Man, One Share.
The way to get these assets that the government now owns and manages inefficiently into private hands is not to sell them off to the highest bidder, which is what they have been doing actually. The way to get them out into the market in the best manner is to literally give the assets away.
But will this proposal address the inequalities generated by decades of apartheid? Richard Knight of the American Committee on Africa thinks not.
It doesn't seem to me that it's going to solve the basic infrastructural problems of South Africa, which are necessary for any kind of proper economic development. Proper schools for the majority, decent housing, a whole series of capital investment programs. These are only going to take place with proper money by the state.
The scheme overall adds tremendous stability, gives large actors within the white and black communities the incentive to move forward towards real reform, meaning one man, one vote democracy. And that might be just the catch that brings the Klerk and enough of the National Party to the bargaining table on this kind of a program, which would be preemptive. This goes before the one man, one vote democracy. This, in essence, is a prerequisite for successful reform.
This debate is still somewhat academic, because the government and the business sector have yet to consider proposals for a fundamental restructuring of the economy.
I think one of the important problems of Professor Hazlitt's proposal is that it's jumping the gun. People in South Africa are debating what a post-apartheid economy should be like. The trade unions are studying the issue. The African National Congress has talked about a mixed economy where markets play a role, but so does the state. By implementing a proposal such as this, the white government would be precluding options for a democratically elected government to choose the form of the South African economy.
We will continue to cover this debate as it unfolds. For South Africa Now, this is Emily Casrell reporting.
In another step closer toward ending apartheid, South Africa's whites-only state schools in the Transvaal opened their doors to all races. 33 primary and secondary schools admitted non-whites for the first time, after the government allowed white parents to vote for their children's schools to become non-racial. Another 172 state schools will also integrate in just a few weeks. This represents a mere 10% of the total number of white schools. Later in the program, we'll examine in depth the crisis of black education in the country.
I'm Joseph Dishaw with the Frontline Focus. With the crisis in the Middle East mounting, the British government announced the withholding of any further aid for the famine in Africa. Should war break out in the Persian Gulf, Mozambique and Angola will be affected. Meanwhile, in Angola, preparations for a transition to a multi-party system have already begun, with many anticipating the country's move to democracy as being a difficult one. Angolan Television recently spoke with the sociologist and historian Arlindo Barbeitos.
We are not used to democracy. This process is something new for us. In our tradition, we don't have, speaking of politics, democratic roots. So democracy will be something everybody has to learn, from the parties up to the population, up to the consequences of these parties.
In the past year, we have kept you informed of our unsuccessful efforts to obtain visas to report from South Africa. The National Writers' Union protested on the show's behalf and has now received a letter which admits that political considerations are involved. Quote, "The approval of applications depends on factors such as the proven professionalism of the representatives of the media institution concerned and their attitude toward the country. The cover letter does, however, invite us to once again submit visa applications."
You're watching South Africa Now, the television news magazine that goes behind the headlines.
The school year in South Africa runs from January to November. Just recently, the government announced the grades for secondary students, and while 96% of white students successfully completed their final exams, only 1/3 of black students passed. In our background report this week, we ask, have black students really failed, or has the system failed the students? Nadja Smith has our report.
Although the South African government has said it is committed to ending apartheid, it still maintains two systems of education, one for whites and one for blacks. The country spends 4 times as much on the schooling of a white child as on a black student. According to recent reports, 5 million black children do not go to school due to their inability to pay school fees or inadequate facilities.
In as far as the education system goes for black people, things have become worse than they've ever been in the past.
Sheila Sisulu is an educator and an advocate of better education for black children. She challenges the government, who has placed the blame for their poor academic performance on the students themselves.
You have been saying our children don't want to go to school. They are boycotting, they are in the streets, they are burning down schools because they don't want education. That's not true. You are chasing them out of school. But for them to learn, the conditions must be such that they are able to learn.
In this report, we will examine 6 conditions which have curtailed black education, factors which have created what has been called a system of enforced failure. The first problem, inadequate facilities.
When you build a school in the white communities, you build 60 classrooms, you build a library, you build a laboratory. You equip those sometimes with the most sophisticated technology. In a black school, when you build a school, you put up a room and you put a teacher in it and you hope for the best.
Mel Holland works for the NECC, the National Education Crisis Committee, which has reported that 80% of black schools have no electricity. Their studies cite another problem. Most black students have not received textbooks. Sheila Sisulu told us how the black community responded to this situation.
After protests by students and teachers, parents had to mount a protest march that ended up in a sit-in in one of the offices of the department because in June, children had not received their books.
The textbooks finally arrived in many classrooms, just a couple of months before final exams.
You find that you have to sit 2-2 on a desk where you share one textbook, and at the end of the subject, the teacher has got to take the textbook with him or her. It's going to the school storeroom, so you don't have much facilities to study.
A third factor, overcrowding. While white classrooms on average have 19 students, black schools have up to 70 students per class. While millions of black children have no access to a school, there are 300,000 empty places in white schools, and many are closing due to under-enrollment. The fourth issue, a high dropout rate. Of these students, only 10 out of 100 will complete high school. Education is compulsory for whites, but not for blacks. Government television reports call black dropouts the lost generation.
Young people between the ages of 10 and 23 who are undereducated, politicized, and unemployed.
What they don't say is that the government has instructed schools to throw out students if they fail their subjects.
The consequences of that is that you see very frustrated students. Frustration being then released through often social violence, crimes, gangsterism, high degree of drink and drug abuse, which is a relatively new phenomenon in the student and youth population of this country.
And as a result,
a fifth factor, underqualified teachers. Poorly trained instructors find it difficult to meet the needs of students, particularly those returning to school after prolonged boycotts.
Many of them were too old to be in the classes which they'd left and ill-equipped to be in the classes that they wanted to be in. The teachers were not able to deal with this problem. They had never been trained. None of us had ever been trained.
You make your water soapy, and then we can steep the cottons.
The final factor in the black education crisis is a limited curriculum, which prepares black children for menial jobs and stifles their motivation.
However, we can swap students from black schools into white schools, but apartheid education still exists. It is not in a black education only, even in white education, for the mere fact that they are taught superiority, to be little gods and the like, and we are taught to be subservient, subordinate and the like. For as long as that is existing in South Africa, we won't get a good result of African children.
Last year, South African now anchor Thandeka Gqubule, then working as a newspaper reporter, went undercover into a Soweto high school during an exam period. She concluded that the state education system was more concerned with controlling black students than educating them.
They don't care that it's chaotic and that there's no schooling going on. They just have come to check if there isn't any news of a riot or any possibility of a riot here. And all they'd like to know is that students are under control, security-wise, that they aren't a security threat. They're not interested in whether they're being taught anything at all.
These factors offer an explanation for the black education crisis, which the government spokespeople rarely address. South Africa Now thought we should hear more from the students, so we invited several recent South African high school graduates to speak about their experiences. Victor Schiffman attended a white school where he received a so-called Christian national education. Sibongile Somagalo and Tami Nyoka went to black schools within the Bantu education system. We focused on 3 issues: the curriculum, liberation and education, and the military presence in the schools.
I, for one, in our school, we had to do woodwork as an extramural activity, and do carpenting, and do gardening, and
like
that
handwork, or
right,
like that.
and then the girls had to, do sewing and all that. So basically, you are being taught in a way to be a laborer, to work in a certain way, and you're not being taught things which maybe, if I can go and play chess, then I'm stimulating my mind.
Yeah.
But if I do gardening, then I think of myself as a future gardener.
The Christian national education, the whole system, it's very subtle. It's not as as obvious as the teacher saying because you are white, you are superior to black people. It wasn't as direct as that, but in subtle ways, like the history we learned. Why is it that we don't learn about the black people's history of South Africa? Why we don't do literature from black South African writers?
I mean, I don't think we were taught, literature from our own people, because our history, South African history, started in 1652, when the white man came to the Cape of Good Hope. And before then, it means there was no history of South Africa, and we're all savages. So you were made to feel as if your people never contributed anything to what made South Africa to be what it is today, or to any so-called civilization, And so anyway, you feel inferior.
We just accepted whatever we were told. I never questioned about the history, until I was older. But whatever you were taught, you're supposed to accept it that way.
If someone is getting, the impression that whatever he's learning in school is inferior, and then the only way to hit back is to stand up and say, I'm not gonna read this material.
They say that because of the kids refusing to learn, that they sort of screwing up their own future.
Okay, I think, I don't know, from my experience, I spent total for about 3 years, involved in boycotts and going to school. And in that process, we didn't just stay there and do nothing. We used to organize, like small cells, and, get books and, interact, teach ourselves what we think is right.
You never think that there's something else, You never think that that the other South Africans have got a different education. You just think that this is the area that I live, and this is the school I go to. If we asked ever a question like, what about what's going on in the townships? What about the black students, Why are they burning their schools? We would be told, shh, it's not your problem, don't think about it.
And you didn't know what was going on?
No. I knew what I saw on television. I didn't see the police shooting the kids. I didn't see the bodies.
Whatever feelings we have, we just keep them inside. We try so much not to expose them to other people, because you don't know who might be your enemy.
After spending a year out of school, boycotting bond education, we came back, and there we had soldiers coming to teach us. And then the government said these soldiers knew science and mathematics, so they were trying to resolve the teacher shortage problem. These soldiers would come with their weapons, and you spend a day there in class, you're looking at the weapon, you're not even listening to what the teacher is saying to you, because you see an enemy in front of you, teaching you science.
We also had soldiers coming to our school, but for a different reason. They were coming to recruit us. So we had a different experience, They were preparing us to come into your schools.
Right.
You're watching South Africa Now. Coming up next, our culture segment, featuring the best music, film, drama, and artistic expression from Southern Africa.
Mzwakhe Mbuli, widely known as the People's Poet, has been imprisoned and under house arrest for years, and now has been allowed out of South Africa for the first time ever. This year, he plans a new album and a tour of Europe, North America, and Japan. Recently, he performed in London, where he shared his feelings about his newfound freedom.
Well, it's a relief that I'm far away from a danger, temporarily. Well, I feel relieved in a way. I mean it when I say I'm a bit out of danger, so when I must sleep at night, I do not think somebody's going to knock very hard or encounter a bomb blast or something like that. So at the moment, it's, for a while, a relief, yeah.
I am the product of hunger. I am the product of social injustice. I represent the victims of tyranny. I represent the insurgent majority. I come from Apartheid land. I reside for a nation. I represent a nation, a peace-loving nation, a nation that never enjoyed freedom since conquest my land is blood-stained. Nevertheless, no oppressive kingdom is eternal. Our heart and tormenting it is to write about the pain and not joy. Our heart and tormenting it is to write about slavery and not freedom.
His poetry is politically charged and received with enthusiasm wherever he performs.
Admire me, I am the conga drums. Admire me, I am the beats. From the conga drums, from the drums of Tabazimbi, I convey royal messages to the people. Listen to the rhythm, listen to the beats. From Congo River to the great ocean, I am like a telex of culture, flowing messages through the beatings of the drums. From frosty land to cold land, I am the beat from the drums of Tabazibi. Of change in Africa, deafening the ears like the winds of change. Get it from me. I revoke the spirit of the forefathers, the spirit that lambasted the foundations of plunder, the spirit that saved you from the jaws of death. They can beat me, but not the mind. Even under the reign of terror, the land is still mine. My land is immovable. Admire me, I am the bits from the drums of change.
That's our show for this week. If you're interested in any of the issues we cover, send a self-addressed stamped envelope to South Africa Now, P.O. Box 1907, Canal Street Station, New York, New York 10013. South Africa Now is produced by Global Vision on a non-profit basis in association with the Africa Fund, a tax-exempt organization providing assistance and relief to victims of apartheid. On behalf of everyone on South Africa Now, I'm Fana D. Kekana. See you next week.
Mandela in America. The new 90-minute video can be ordered from South Africa Now for $25, which includes postage and handling. Write to South Africa Now, Post Office Box 1907, Canal Street Station, New York, New York 10013. A portion of the proceeds will help fund South Africa Now.